because I want to do like I want to do almost like a speed run of going through some gender critical talking points, because I did a video recently whenever I was talking about like intersex conditions, and people are confused, like, why are you bringing up intersex conditions? Why are you talking about this? It's because when you bring up intersex conditions, you are attacking the gender critical position of biological essentialism. Now, I've made another video on biological essentialism, and if you're not sure what it is or like what the flaws and stuff are in it, you can easily go and pull up that video. It's old at this point, but the information in it is still solid. Like their arguments don't change. Like they don't update themselves with new information. They've been saying the exact same stuff like forever. And biological essentialism boils down to this. And like, I know some people say, oh, this isn't the gender critical position and that this is a straw man of their position. I'll address that too. So what biological essentialism is claiming is that there's going to be some type of, some necessary trait, some necessary condition that you must have in order to be a woman, a man, whatever. Typically, they're going to say, because they conflate man and woman with sex. So they mean male and female when they say this. They don't actually mean man or woman, but that's the language that they will use. So they'll say that there must be some necessary condition. And they used to say things like gonads. So like, oh, if somebody has a penis, that makes them a male, therefore they're a man. And if somebody has a vagina, that they're female, and therefore a woman. Now, gonads fell apart because obviously you can get surgeries and you can alter those components of your body. So then they moved from gonads down to chromosomes. And they'll say, oh, well, XX chromosomes equals female, and that therefore equals woman. And then on the other side of it, they'll say XY chromosomes equals male, and therefore a man. Until you point out to them various conditions that people are born with genetically, where they do not have XX chromosomes or XY chromosomes. So they might have XXY, they might have XO. There are like tons of combinations. So there's like more than 20 of these different combinations of chromosomes. But the important part here is that there are some people, due to like a SRY gene essentially transpositing onto an X chromosome, that you can end up with people that have XX chromosomes but have a penis. And you can have some people that have XY chromosomes but end up with a vagina. So very clearly, obviously, XX chromosomes doesn't necessarily, remember, necessity here. And when we say necessity, you're saying it couldn't be any other way. It must be this way. It's necessary. So obviously, having XX chromosomes does not necessarily mean that you have a vagina, and having XY chromosomes does not necessarily mean that you have a penis. So that falls apart. And now they only have clusters of sufficient conditions, not necessary. So then they moved from chromosomes, and they'll often retreat from chromosomes to gametes. And they'll say, okay, well, if you produce large immobile gametes, those are ova and eggs, and therefore female. And if you produce small mobile gametes, that makes you a male, and therefore a man. Then you ask this exact same series of questions. Well, if it's necessary, what about people that don't produce any gametes at all? What about people that have had their gametes removed entirely? And then they will end up saying like, oh, well, it depends on how, if you had a proper functioning set of gametes, this is what it would. So now they're talking about like potential, and they will do this forever. The important thing to note is that there are no necessary conditions. There are sufficient conditions, but they're not going to be necessary. And greetings, Kyle. It's always good to see you. And the reason why I want to highlight this is because once you get to sufficient conditions, once they say, well, there are clusters of sufficient conditions, and very clearly we would extend that to include like intersex people. Obviously, you are setting it up so that it's an open category, and trans people very obviously meet these sufficient conditions. Every time they list a sufficient condition, a trans person could have that condition. So they're not exclusive conditions. Then you start to lose the ability to justify, to discriminate the gatekeeping, to say, oh, well, it's fine if you have different chromosomes as long as you're not trans. It's fine if you have different, gonads, but as long as you're not trans. It's fine if you have different chromosomes, as long as you're not trans. And we know that in the gender critical worldview, that's not even true, because you can look at people like, a main cleaf, right? A main cleaf is a woman, born a woman, raised a woman, which is another thing that gender criticals will say, is that, well, if you were, born as they're going to identify as like a male identified person, then you weren't raised as a woman. And they are now appealing misogynistically to a pretend universal shared experience that every single woman has, being raised as identical to one another. And we all know that every single human being on this planet is different from each other. We all have different experiences. No two people share identical experiences, even if you're twins and you are raised by the same parents. Psychologically, you end up experiencing different phenomena because of your biological makeup, chemistry, etc., than what someone else experiences. Something that might have been traumatizing for you might not traumatize the next person. Something that that you felt was like really good and made you feel happy, and someone like complimenting you on might make the next person feel unhappy or dissatisfied. When I was growing up, anytime people would like compliment me, if I like ever did anything, they're like, "Oh, you're so strong," it made me feel awkward. Like, I did not like being perceived that way, especially when my peers would do the same things that I did and no one would say anything about their strength. I'm like, how come the other girls like pick up something heavy and carry it, and you never say to them like, "Oh, you're so strong," type of thing. And it ends up being misogynistic because you're boiling down every woman's experience to the same thing. You're saying that every single woman, regardless of if they're like able-bodied, if they're, black, white, tall, short, big boobs, small boobs, whatever, you're saying that every single one of these women all have the exact same experiences growing up. They have some shared experience that like men can't understand. But you are essentially creating an artificial category where you're saying that all these women are treated the same way growing up. And then when we look, we can see when people have tried to do, y'all bring up John Money all the time. And John Money is an infamous case where this guy that was a psychologist did corrective surgery. Well, they had a child born. They tried to do a, why am I forgetting the word? Circumcision. And they ended up botching the circumcision really bad. And the doctors at the time thought it might be better if they just do GRS on the child, give them a neo-vagina, and then just raise them as a girl, because that would be less traumatizing than raising them with this botched circumcision. It's terrible. They shouldn't have done it, but they did. And John Money is the doctor that tried to raise this child that was, a born male child whose internal sense of self developed in a cisgendered sense. So this person always felt that they were a boy, even though they had GRS since they were a baby, and they were gaslit the entire time they were being raised and being told that they were a girl. Now, gender critical people, because they can't fully think about these positions. All they hear is buzzwords, and they think that this proves like their position, which is the contrary. This proves the trans position. Their claim is that there's some type of innate gender identity that is automatically associated with being male. So being male is being a man, and this person grew up identifying as a man, even though that they were being raised as a girl. But this is actually a strong defeater for the gender critical position that trans people are somehow converted into being trans. The John Money case shows That's not, you can't just raise someone and tell them that they're a girl and that's going to make them a girl. This person grew up always having a different gender identity than what he was told. He was told that he was a girl and being raised as a girl. And he was saying like, no, I'm a boy, I'm a man, and I know that I should be a man. That's what he was saying. So like, this proves what we are saying. You can, even as a child, you will have an internalized sense of self and identity that you can then express to other people. And obviously, when it comes to trans people, the difference with us is that our internal sense of self, our identity on when it comes to gender, all right, because there's plenty of other types of identity as well that notice are not challenged at all by these people, and they expect you to just assume that it's true on a self-report. All right, like for instance, if they claim that they're a Christian, if they claim that they are a woman or they are a man, or they have some national identity, or they identify as a fan of something, like they don't go around telling people like, oh, I don't believe you're a Christian. You're lying. You're mistaken about your beliefs. We don't go around telling people that they are mistaken about their internal sense of self or identity on other subjects besides being trans. These gender critical people are the ones that are doing this, and it's nonsense. We know that identity is something that you develop internally yourself, and it continues to develop throughout your life. This isn't something that is just assumed at the very beginning, and it maintains some kind of stasis that never changes. That's not true. And that's why when people say something like, oh, but you wouldn't say the same thing for sexuality for like gay people or whatever, because now you're hinting at like conversion therapy. And I'm like, have you ever talked to bisexual people? Have you ever talked to pansexual people? There's a very broad expression of sexuality besides just straight and gay. And I can already tell you, a lot of people that are bi or pan later in life started off identifying as strictly like one of those two. They'll be, either straight or gay. And then later on in their life, as they're exploring their identity, they're exploring their sexuality, they realize that, you know what? I thought that I was totally like uncomfortable dating somebody with some gender expression, but I'm actually okay with that. Or they might say something, I totally would not be okay with dating somebody that has a penis. But then later on, they realize like, well, wait a minute, there's a lot of other things that I can do with somebody besides just doing something with their penis. And as long as your partner is not going to insist on you doing that, then they recognize that they're okay with it. And they go from being like gay identifying to like bi or pan. And there's going to be some gender critical idiot that hears this and is like, oh my God, Zoe supports conversion therapy. No, I don't. That would be like the dumbest takeaway you could ever have, because obviously I'm talking about like heterosexual people that this happens to as well, where they identify very strictly as being heterosexual. And then later on through gender or sexual exploration, or especially if they find furries, they might realize very quickly, or they find like femboys or something where they're like, okay, you know what? Like, there's a femboy that says that he's a man, and he like purposely, like, you know, he just talks with a regular deep voice, but he enjoys like cross-dressing or something like that, or he enjoys a very feminine gender expression. And then all of a sudden you realize like, I could be with somebody who identifies as a man and is very comfortable with his masculinity, but he's a femboy or something. It's just that whenever you say to like trans people, on the other side of that, they'll say, well, why can't y'all just be femboys? And this is like a lot of things that people say to you in order to like encourage like internalized transphobia in you. All right. When they are trying to convince you of this, they are trying to essentially conversion therapy your identity out of you with societal pressure. And that's not okay. And you shouldn't be doing that to people. The reason why trans women are not femboys is because that's not what our identity is. Right? It's an incongruence that we have with our internal sense of self versus what our body is. That incongruence may or may not cause stress. This is why gender dysphoria in the DSM was altered from gender identity disorder. Gender identity disorder was way too broad of a category. It captured way too many people that you wouldn't want to capture when you're trying to isolate trans people. Like, you don't want to capture just gender nonconforming people when you specifically are looking for trans people. And that was one of the reasons why they did that, because gender incongruence does not necessarily mean that you're going to have gender dysphoria. Gender dysphoria specifically is the stress felt caused by a recognized incongruence. So you might have some people that recognize that they have this incongruence, but they don't experience dysphoria. Those might be people that are gender nonconforming, but they don't seek medical transition. Or they, all they're going to do is like change their name or something like that, or maybe use different pronouns, but they don't feel the need to like take HRT or something like that. And as far as the DSM itself, when you're like, oh, but gender dysphoria is in the DSM, so that means that trans people are mentally ill. No, it doesn't. It just means that we have stress surrounding a gender incongruence. That's not a problem with our identity. That's acknowledging a medical issue that we have that is reduced with treatment, and the proper treatment is gender transition. And then on the other side of this, going back to the biological essentialism component. So we've already pulled apart some of this. The other thing to consider with biological essentialism is an argument that goes something like this. If you are saying that every single male is a man, then why, and it's not a social construct. All right. This is a gender, like bioessentialist truth. Then by that reasoning, follow through. This is not a straw man. Every single male animal on the planet would also be a man. And male trees would also be men in that view, because you've said all, and you've stipulated it on biology. And even the trees producing pollen to pollinate other trees would meet your criteria for being a man in that sense. Now, if you want to limit it to humans and you say, well, only humans experience gender, what would be the difference in humans to justify the restriction to a closed category of humans versus other mammals or other animals, or even plants that reproduce sexually? And that's because the answer to that is it's social. That's why it's restricted to us and not to other animals. It's social. It is a social construct. And I get frustrated in hearing this rhetoric over and over and over, as if this stuff has not been addressed and debunked. And I find it very frustrating when people say, well, trans ideology has been debunked. No, it's trans ideology is the existence of trans people. You cannot debunk the existence of people with an argument. Existence isn't a predicate of a proposition. You cannot argue something into existence. That's why the Christians for millennia have been trying to argue their God into existence, and they can't do it. And you can't argue someone out of existence. That doesn't mean that you can't harm us, which they absolutely want to do. There are gender critical people that will say things like the number of trans people need to be reduced by the government by any means necessary. These aren't just like vapid talking points. This is not just like when people say trans people are like, we feel we have a grievance culture or something like that. I don't care if gender critical people like respect my pronouns. I don't care if gender critical people think that like I'm valid as a human being. What I do care about are the legal attacks against trans people. I care about legislation that they try and pass, limiting where we can go to the bathroom, limiting what spaces we have access to in public accommodations. They want to remove us from housing. They want to take our jobs away. They want to remove our medical care that we depend on to be healthy, productive people. They want to medically abuse us, and a lot of them now support conversion therapy, which is a form of torture. You are medically abusing people. You're psychologically abusing them. You're verbally abusing them. You're restricting the access that they have where they can go and leave. And you are essentially trying to rip apart their identity, and you're trying to gaslight them into being confused about who they are. Those are the problems that I have with gender critical people. And every single one of the things that they cry about and that they are so worried and concerned about, and that they have serious, genuine concerns, is complete and utter nonsense. There's no statistical like impact of trans people assaulting cis women in bathrooms. That number does not exist. There's no statistically significant number of trans people competing in women's sports, like taking away their championships or whatever the imagined grievance is. And when some people, like a Riley Gaines, ties in 5th place with a trans woman, 5th place, she ends up making a career, making hundreds of thousands of dollars grifting against trans rights after that by becoming an anti-trans rights activist. And most of these gender critical people that's what they are. They are anti-trans activists. And they will project things onto us like TRAs and stuff like that because they want to diminish the impact of what we have to say. They don't want you to hear my words. They think that I should not be able to talk to you. That's why Project 2025, part of it is trying to systemically identify like the existence of trans people as sexual content so that they can start removing us from platforms so that you can't hear what we have to say. And people will say like, oh, well, trans people just complain about everything and they're never satisfied and they're the language police or whatever else. No, we are just trying to exist. That's what the other side is doing to us. Now, are you going to find some people that are like very sensitive or might be like unreasonable or whatever within the trans circles? Sure, those people exist among every walk of life, among every circle. You can point to people that are always going to be unreasonable within like some group of people, but pointing to like a handful of individuals among millions of people and then extrapolating the bad behavior of those few people onto the rest of everyone else is it's a hasty generalization, but you're also trying to essentialize and weaponize the crimes that other people did onto the rest of us. The trans shooter issue, right? They want to say, oh, there's 5 to 7 trans shooters over the last few years that have done mass shootings. I'm just going to give them the high-end number. Let's just say it's 7, all right? You can just have all 7 of those numbers, all right? Compare that to thousands of cis men that do this. And you never hear them talking about, we need to really do something about white cis het men. Here, we need to, come down on them or crack down on them. And I like that, like, people like will come and go. And then when you bring up like cis het white, people just drop off or whatever. It's like, oh, I don't want to hear this. But why can't you hear these words? If we're all just delusional and you think that we're out of our mind, why can't you grapple with what I'm saying? Why do you run away from these words? Why do you get so activated? You hear white, cis, het, and you immediately tune everything out. Because you're like, oh, well, this is just rhetoric. That just sounds like rhetoric. It's not rhetoric when we know that the statistically significant group that murders people in mass is white, cis, het men. That's y'all. That's the group that does it. And yet we don't hear anything about, we need to police that group. We need to consider removing the guns away from white, cis, het people. We need to consider, putting background checks so that they can't get access to stuff and make them do required mental health checks. Or like the president has said and alluded to, like throwing us trans people in mental asylums. All right. Y'all don't have to deal with this. Cis people don't get told these sorts of things. Politicians don't normally fantasize about these sorts of things unless you're a migrant, and then in which case, yeah, you can just be rounded up and thrown in a concentration camp. But if you think for 2 seconds that these gender critical people wouldn't round us up and throw us in camps and just be rid of us if they could, you're out of your mind. And you can say that this is like a fantasy, or I'm straw manning their position. I want you to understand something. Genuinely understand this. These people will deny the existence of trans kids and then deny them access to puberty blockers. But let's say for a second that we have the information, we have the data on puberty blockers. We know that they are safe for as far as like medications go. This has been studied for decades. We have the data on it. We know what the data is. And when people say, oh, this hasn't been studied long enough, they're lying to you. When they say there's irreversible side effects from these medications, I mean, maybe some of the side effects, but a lot of the other stuff that they point to, bone density and that type of thing, we know that once people start taking cross-sex hormones, that balances back out within a couple of years. And on top of that, if their argument did hold water and they're like, oh, well, you know, kids just can't know if they actually want to agree to, you know, doing changes like that. Oh, you mean puberty. That's what you're talking about. When you're talking about trans, like puberty blockers and an HRT regimen, you're talking about a trans puberty. And when you're saying we don't know, you know, kids can't consent to something like this, what you're actually saying is they can't consent to puberty. But you wouldn't agree with something like we should block puberty for all kids until they're, you know, old enough to sort themselves out and figure out if they really want to go through that puberty. No, you would say, oh, well, natal puberty, you know, endogenous puberty, that's just fine. They should just be forced to get, you know, massive amounts of testosterone or estrogen, depending on whatever their body is equipped with. And you act as if that doesn't cause some irreversible changes, as if that isn't going to cause a significant medical cost if you're a trans person later on. If you're a trans person, like testosterone thickens your vocal cords. So like all of us that have been forced to go through this male puberty, we will end up having to do voice training to try and repair some of the damage that was done. And even if we switch to estrogen at like 18 or 21, if you've already gotten height from testosterone, if you've already gotten like wider shoulders from testosterone or wider hips from estrogen, or you've grown breasts from estrogen, like that's going to be expensive medical cost that those trans people now have to pay for if they can even afford it to try to alter some of those changes that were done to them forcibly against their will. And whenever I ask people about stuff like this, gender critical people will tell you, oh, but you know, what about the regret rate? Oh, what if somebody regrets it? We don't see that. We have the data. There's mountains and mountains and mountains of data on this, and you can read all about it. All right. The regret rate for this is exceedingly low. If their concerns were true, then you would expect there to be a large group of detransitioners that have come out of like transitioning, and you don't find that. The number is around 1%. And every single time that you point to stuff like this and you say, well, we have the data, it will never be enough for gender critical people. I'm telling you right now, it's never enough because they weren't convinced by data. They're not moved by logic. So you can say, look, there's mountains and mountains and mountains of data over here. And we know that the regret rate is roughly 1 to 3%, 3% on the highest end. So that means that 97% of time, people that realize that they are trans, they are correct in this belief and they maintain that position. Then of that 1 to 3%, 62% of them will go on to retransition later. So 40%, 38% of, of 1 to 3%, that's the actual number of people that regret this. That number is incredibly low. And before you start typing away, like, oh, see, there are people there. Some of them regret it. Before you say anything, remember, we do not keep medical care from people with conditions that have a significantly higher regret rate. Significantly. Just about every other possible medical alteration you can do to your body, knee surgery, back surgery, heart surgery, Every single one of these other conditions all have a much higher regret rate than transition care does, which is roughly around 1 to 3%. And doctors will tell you that that 1 to 3%, a lot of them consider that like a fantasy number that they wish that they could get to with other conditions. They wish the numbers were that high, for knee surgeries and back surgery and everything else. If only 1 to 3% of people ever regretted it, then 40% of those people actually didn't regret it, and it's only because of how they were socially being treated. That's why they went through this in the first place. Yeah, that would be a vast improvement over a lot of the medical care that we already have. But people don't care about that. They're just fear-mongering about this. Morgan says, unless it comes early, in which case we use the exact same medication to stop it, yet they claim puberty blockers cause irreversible damage. Oh, 100%. Precocious puberty, that's why we have like data on this, right? We've been treating cis kids with the same medication. And by the way, cis women, cis men, they get the exact same medications with no question whatsoever. Like whenever someone like Elon Musk goes in, or Joe Rogan goes and gets their testosterone treatments, they're getting HRT. No one questions that. And a lot of these like very active like transphobes and stuff like that, the entire, J.K. Rowling and her entire club, most of those women over there are probably getting estrogen. They are taking HRT themselves because they've gone through menopause or they've gotten older. And it's extremely common for cis women to be given estradiol and progesterone after they have menopause or while they're going through it, just like trans women get. But there's no question about the safety of those drugs, even though they're taking the exact same thing. And like largely this boils down to, and what I think all of this stuff should come down to is like outcomes. It's outcomes for people. When you want to talk about like the sports issue, and they're like, oh, but what about trans women in sports? I'm like, oh, it depends on her medical outcome, right? If she is like if she's identical to cis women and she falls within the exact same ranges as cis women does, and she competes like, she has the exact same like hormonal balance and everything else, then she doesn't have an obvious advantage there. And like at the end of the day, I think like the obvious advantage talking point as well is also weak because it's sports. That's why we want to see people compete anyway, is to see people that are, at peak physical condition, go out there and do their thing. And at the end of the day, we don't say stuff like, no, I'm sorry. If you're 6'7", you can't play basketball. Oh, I'm sorry. If you're 6'6", you can't be a boxer because your arms are too long. And that's not fair to all of the like 5'11" boxers and shorter. Michael Phelps was allowed to swim and he's like part fish. It's disingenuous to pretend for 2 seconds that like people actually like genuinely care about fairness in sports. They don't. That's why, people that are 6'8" can play basketball against people that are like 5'8". When it's like, come on, in what world is that even a competition for that sport specifically? Now, I'm not saying it's not complicated. I'm not saying that there isn't nuance there and that each person is different as on a case-by-case basis, but that's how you rule on something like this. You look at the medical outcomes of each person. Does that mean that some people might not be allowed to compete in some sports? I mean, yeah, maybe. But whenever it comes, and you can make an argument that for like physical sports, you want weight class restrictions. You want height restrictions. That way, you're making this as fair as possible and with, as little risk as possible for the combatants. But when we start talking about like darts, fishing, you think that trans women shouldn't be allowed to compete in darts or fishing? It's just ridiculous. And then like on top of this, just so y'all know, all right, gender critical people among them, this is a real thing and you can like Google this, okay? TERFs use a term called peaking. And what peaking is that they use it in two ways. One is they will endlessly attack trans people with bullshit information about trans identity, and they will relentlessly dogpile you until they make you uncomfortable enough with yourself, or they gaslight you enough into being like unsure about your identity that they'll say that they successfully piqued you, as in they piqued your self-doubt, and now you're in a state of confusion, or you're feeling distressed or whatever. They've piqued your distress enough that they know you're going to run off or whatever. On the other side of this, they will also use the term piquing when they talk about making cis women afraid of trans people. They'll say that, oh, they piqued some woman on the bus and now she's researching gender critical stuff. And they will like continuously sea lion and be like, oh, I just have concerns. And aren't you just worried about, X, Y, and Z? Well, did you hear about such and such that happened of this woman getting attacked in a bathroom? Once again, there's no data to support this. There's no statistical significance of trans people assaulting cis women. But if you listen to TERFs, they'll have like a laundry list of people to list out, even though there's no statistical significance. In the exact same way, where you have racists that will usually be able to rattle off a handful of cases of white people murdered by black people. And they're like, oh, but don't you think about this? Don't you worry about this? No, that's not a statistically significant number. You're cherry picking a handful of cases to justify this. If you wanted to, you could look up cis women that assaulted other cis women in restrooms, right? Like sometimes cis women do SA other cis women, and you could just pull up those cases and you could have a laundry list of those cases. And but well, what about this person? What about this person? What about this person? Which brings me to the next talking point, right? Their next talking point is this conversion therapy. They're saying unironically that if you support like trans people being validated, then you must support conversion therapy against like gay people. This is stupid on like several levels. Like, let's just be real here for a second. So they're saying that, oh, well, if you think that you can convert a gay man into a straight woman, then you support conversion therapy. First of all, why would your first thought be that whoever is like transitioning, they must be a gay man? Why are you saying that? Like, that's already based on incorrect information that they are trying to pull from like this gender identity disorder garbage that was removed out of the DSM specifically because it did not capture the group of trans people. It captured too many people. It was too broad. That's why they changed it. And one of the conditions there was, oh, if the kids have a different gender expression or they play with different toys or whatever, you could be caught with this gender identity disorder. So like tomboys would be considered to have gender identity disorder, even though they had no incongruence with their sex. And that's the issue, is that it was capturing too many people for gender expression, but not capturing people that had an incongruence with their sex. That's why it was changed and removed. So now you end up with people that will point back to like, oh, well, all gay men must be the ones transitioning. Do you know how many trans women were married to a woman in a marriage, like a traditionally arranged, like what would appear to be a cis-het marriage? Then they come out as trans. They transition, and like sometimes their wife stays with them, and like, they're both exploring their sexuality, and like, okay, well, like, are we okay with like being lesbians here? And sometimes that works out, and sometimes the wife might divorce the trans person and say like, hey, I'm not a lesbian. Now, somebody who asks this stupid question about conversion therapy, like, do they appreciate how stressful it is and how painful it is in people's lives when stuff like this happens? Genuinely. They don't care about the stress that trans people go through or that our families go through. And this is like a big change. And like, especially when you're exploring your own identity and you're having a realization like, oh no, like I'm trans and I want to change this. I can't deal with this anymore. So first of all, not every trans person, every trans woman was a gay man. That's just stupid. And then second of all, not every trans woman is a heterosexual woman that is into men. I'm a trans woman. I'm not heterosexual at all. I am pansexual. Like other people's, any configuration doesn't bother me. And this is the case for a lot of other trans people. You end up having plenty of trans people that are bisexual or pansexual. Or, they might identify their sexuality as something like more nuanced than that. It happens. To pretend that every single trans person has the exact same experiences, once again, we're right back to where we were when they were trying to essentialize all women as having the same shared experience. Now they're trying to essentialize every single trans woman as having the same experiences. So they just can't help themselves but use hasty generalizations about all of us and say like, oh, well, there must be some of you that are like this. Therefore, all of you or most of you must be like this. But I've seen people sharing this talking point, and it's a really stupid talking point. And on top of that, like, I just want to say how offensive it is. Not just claiming offense here, but genuine. I want you to think about this. Someone is saying, this is what their claim really is, that you exploring your own identity, thinking about how you view yourself in relation to your body and the things that make you happy or unhappy about yourself, or how you would be a happier person. They are comparing that to conversion therapy, which is literal torture for queer people. You're talking about psychologically abusing them, verbally abusing them, medically abusing them, isolating them away from their peers, or keeping them at some compound or camp until they agree that they are no longer queer or trans, including forcing them to watch propaganda, in an attempt to actually damage or alter their identity. And we know that the people that are survivors of this stuff usually have a lot of trauma surrounding this. A significant amount of trauma. And you might have a handful of cases where people are like, oh, well, I'm totally no longer gay or something. But then you look at the life that they're living and the things that they say about it in their biographies, and they're completely, clearly traumatized. And then, of course, the suicide rate among this group is pretty high. And you want to talk about the suicide rate among trans people, which we already know, studies over and over and over again have demonstrated that if you give trans people supporting family, a supporting family structure around them, and even if one parent accepts them, that will drop their suicide rate significantly down to about within ranges of cis people. It's just that right now you have so much societal pressure on trans people, and you have so many people targeting us with legislation, trying to target our access to medical care, trying to demonize us, and the governments that are issuing continuous threats against us, that there's an incredible amount of stress on trans people right now just for existing. And whenever people say something like, oh, but I've heard another ridiculous comparison to be like, oh, but Holocaust victims weren't committing suicide at the same rate that trans people were. I've heard stuff like this before. And I'm like, it's as tragic as it is. There was lots of people that survived the Holocaust that did end up suiciding out. And there were also a lot of people that survived the Holocaust that were severely traumatized by this, severely. And when people say callous things, they're trying to minimize trans suffering, but they're also trying to say that somehow the Holocaust victims were very resilient, and they just, they were, they're emotionless about it. They just easily withstood it. I'm like, no, they didn't. You're not aware of the trauma and the suffering that those people went through. So you can take your absurd comparison and shove it. I'm trying to think of what are their other popular talking points. Because I think that is about a lot of it, right? There's this whole LGB movement garbage. The LGB stuff was started by mostly cis-het people, like a group of them, and it's their goal to drive division within LGBT people. And if you think for 2 seconds, if you support anything like this, if you think that, well, the gay people and the lesbians would be fine if they would just separate themselves from trans people and queer people, I've got another think coming for you, okay? Just so you know, sodomy was not made illegal in the U.S. Like, the sodomy laws were not struck down until the year 2003. So before 2003, you could be arrested if you for sodomy if you had sex with a same-sex partner. In 2015, they passed gay marriage. And if you think for 2 seconds that the Supreme Court is not looking at rolling back gay marriage, they're already talking about getting rid of Obergefell. And then there are also state legislatures that are talking about wanting to put sodomy laws back on the books again. All right, you're next. Just so you know, if they are successful in pushing all this legislation and all this stuff against trans people, they will be coming for the LGBT people next. Murfreesboro, Tennessee, tried to pass a law a few years ago, and that law would have made it illegal for queer couples to hold hands in public or do any public displays of affection. So when I tell you that the same bedfellows that would pass the anti-trans legislation would pass anti-gay legislation, know that I'm not kidding. And if you think for 2 seconds that they wouldn't enforce sodomy laws on you, go back and look at Lawrence v. Texas. There's a reason why it ended up in court in the first place. And police, going back to the 1950s and 60s, used to routinely raid the homes of queer people and arrest us and raid nightclubs and everything else. The gay bars that you like to go to, those would be a thing of the past. Going to, like conventions and stuff like that, BDSM conventions or like LGBT spaces and stuff like that, those would be a thing of the past. This type of authoritarian administration that would crack down on trans rights would also crack down on queer rights. All right, the people at Stonewall, the people at the Compton cafeteria riots, they all understood and saw on a daily basis that when the police came to harass the trans people there, they would often beat the crap out of the gay guys too. They did not just leave. They did not just target the trans women or target the drag queens, which, by the way, why do you think that they were crying so much about Drag Queen Story Hour? Drag queens are not trans people. Drag queens aren't even necessarily gay men. Some of them are they just like cross-dressing. And yet they literally protested those events with firearms. You don't understand what these LGBT without the T things happened in 2003. Like, do they think that they won the respect of the abusers? Oh yeah, no, 100%. So here's the thing. Majority of LGBT people see through this bullshit. They see it for exactly what it is. It's a divide and conquer strategy. But there are some people that think that they won gay marriage and that they should just assimilate and disappear. And the more noise they make, the more attention they get. And that attention is where the social pushback is coming from. Because they don't realize a lot of times that in 2015, only like a little bit more than half the states had even passed gay marriage before it was made a federal law. And there were states that were still like fighting it and going against it. They're not old enough to remember when George W. Bush was on TV, the American president, and saying things like marriage is between one man and one woman. They don't remember that. Or they have blinders on and they don't think that those rights would be rolled back because they can't look at something like what happened with Roe v. Wade, and they can't recognize that just like they pushed those rights back, they would do the same thing to gay marriage, and they want sodomy laws back on the books. And hell, in places like Murfreesboro, they wanted to make it illegal for you to even hold hands with your partners. Do you think like people in that authoritarian society, once they realize like, oh, there's a lot of LGBT people at like furry cons and stuff like that, you think like those types of conventions and what's going on there, do you think that's going to be allowed anymore? Yeah, quick, we just have to fawn enough to make sure that they know we're their ally. Right. Except for once they get done with us, they're going to stab that group in the back and put these laws back on the books. Yeah, it's sad. And like I said, majority of people are not falling for it. That's why when they poll over and over and over, what's the largest group supporting trans women? It is cis women, lesbians, because they recognize correctly that the exact same thing, justifications that are used to target our rights would be used to target their rights. And I think that's about where I'm going to close up this segment with, because at the end of the day, when they poll women over and over and over, do they support trans rights? The vast, overwhelming majority of all women, vast majority, support trans rights. They support trans women. Most of them do. TERFs and gender critical people want to ignore, minimize, or dismiss every woman that doesn't agree with them. And we've seen this play out over and over again. Every single time women are given a vote and a choice to include trans women, they include trans women. There was a pretty infamous case recently where gender critical people filed complaints to try and get trans women banned from a women's pond in the UK, and try to be like, oh, trans women are not allowed to use the women's pond. And there ended up being like a lot of pushback, and they were threatening to like boycott the organization and everything else. So the organization said, hey, we will hold a vote and let the people that swim here come out and vote for it and determine what our policy is on this. Vast majority of women voted in favor of allowing trans women to use the pond. And of course, TERFs are mad as hell about it. Remember the Cass review. So Cass ends up being this person that gets hired to review all this trans literature and studies and everything else in the UK, to then give them recommendations or her opinion on the state of standards of healthcare, especially for trans kids. And Cass goes through, does the review, and then says that she's dissatisfied with some of the studies for this, that, and the other reason. Nowhere in her review did she say that she recommended for kids not to be given access to puberty blockers or medical transition care. Nowhere in there. And she said that we need better, longer term studies. So then the UK, acting on this, decides that they are going to take puberty blockers, make them still accessible to trans kids, but make all the trans kids that are getting access to this essentially agree to be enrolled in a study. J.K. Rowling and her friends, they were kissing so much ass on the Cass review, and they were touting it and waving it everywhere, and they were dancing around talking about like, this is the end of trans healthcare and everything else. They found out that the government is like, okay, well, we're going to take these recommendations and we'll go out and do serious long-term studies on puberty blockers. They are now shitting their pants and sharing around petitions, trying to get people to be outraged and sign, letters demanding that the government does not allow these trials for puberty blockers. So then the question is, at what point are they satisfied? The answer is never. There's nothing enough to satisfy these types of people. They simply want us to stop existing. That's what they want. Because when you start saying things like, there's no such thing as a trans child, okay, but then we have children that are requesting access to puberty blockers, and you're saying, well, I would be okay with it if only there were long-term studies on this and we could actually see the outcomes for these people, even though we have some studies that have went on for over a 50-year period, but they're dissatisfied with those studies. So then the real answer to this is they just don't want people to have access to this care at all, and they want us removed from society, as some of their thought leaders have said. And at the end of the day, the vast majority of women support us because they recognize the solidarity, and that if you allow some group of women to be targeted with this garbage, you are making it easier to discriminate against all women. And that's why when Roe was overturned, I saw over and over and over trans women sharing this, trans women talking about this is like terrible and it's awful, and like how many women are going to be hurt by this, and like it's healthcare. Like these women need access to this. And you know who wasn't saying anything about it? Gender critical people, TERFs, J.K. Rowling, dead silent for days on it. Because at the end of the day, the very people that they supported and the very people that they said that you should go and vote for and that you should put in power and you should help put in places of power, those people turned right around and removed women's rights. Because at the end of the day, the gender critical position is misogyny. It's based in misogyny. It's based in essentializing a woman's body down to the function of a uterus. And that's why the very far right Nazi types and stuff, that's why they get along with gender critical types. Both these groups are very misogynistic. It's just that one group of them is wanting to essentially use women as baby factories, remove their access to healthcare, remove their access to having control of their own reproductive system. And the other group is trying to essentialize women down to being nothing but a uterus, and a functioning uterus if she's a proper woman. And we would recognize immediately the misogyny in that. Not all women share the exact same experiences. Women come from all different walks of life. Different things have happened to each one of us. We are all still women. And at the end of the day, access to women's health care is true for abortion. That's also true for HRT, because cis women use HRT all the time. Some trans women might get implants. Plenty of cis women get implants. Some trans women might get FFS. Plenty of cis women get FFS. There are plenty of gender affirming surgeries that cis women get and that trans women get. And I guess the last thing that I want to talk about on this, and I'm going to clip this into a video, and some people might just say, hold on, I want to cover what I'll talk about first, cis, right? Just because this is a term that all it means is not trans. People keep freaking out about it, especially a lot of the cis people. Like, oh my God, you're calling me cis. Cis is a slur or whatever else. It's like, stop shitting your pants. Stop crying like a baby. All cis means is that you're not trans. The word comes from Greek, the same place where we get the word trans from. I know that y'all don't like facts, and y'all want to live in your own little fantasy world where you get to decide everyone else's identity and everything else. And you like to language police people and tell us what words we are and are not allowed to say. Okay. I'm sorry. Freedom of speech, baby. You're allowed to say cis. You're allowed to say cisgender, because cis just means not trans. I don't know why you would get upset at being called not trans. When you get upset at being called cis, you're acting very sus. But let's be real. The reason why they want to do this, and I'll just spell it out, okay? They say that they don't want to use the word cis because they want to use words like normal instead. And what would the opposite of normal be? The opposite of normal would be not normal. So they are trying to put moralizing language into their identity. They want to moralize about how they are so normal and we are so not normal. All right. Well, it doesn't work that way. All right. Transgender people, cisgender people, sorry, but adjectives still apply to you. Okay. You have pronouns. Whoever angry person responding to me, you have pronouns that you use 100%. And you might say, well, I don't use whatever. I is a pronoun. Don't say I, don't say me, don't say they, them, right? Yeah, of course. I mean, there's non-binary identities as well. Trans, cis, and yeah, you can have non-binary. There are other expressions of identity. And the expressions are not, we are never going to agree to the terms normal and not normal, Because who the hell is defining normal in this sense? Normal in what sense? You know, when you're talking about cis or trans, those are specific terms for specific things. And we understand what people are talking about. When you say normal and not normal, you're using normative language. And I'm sorry, I'm not going to let you just bake in moralizing claims or implications inside of the terms that you insist that we use for you. It's not going to happen. If you're a cisgender person, you're cis. And if you're trans, you're trans. If you're non-binary, you're non-binary. It will be weird to get mad for identifying you the way that you identify. All right. Notice how we will call you cis when you're cis. We don't make up some other word for you. We're not trying to degrade you. We're not trying to say, oh, you're not really cis. How do you know that you're really cis? Right. Cis as in SIS. Yeah. I know that there are some people that will call them sissies, you know, and I think that is, it's, you know, a playful teasing there, but it's weird when they act this way, of course, because they use those words to label us that all the time. I remember being called a sissy so often, like growing up, it was pathetic. You know, they would call us also, I mean, a bunch of names I'm not going to repeat here, you know, one starts with an F, right? But, I think that pretty much wraps up a lot of my thoughts on this. Oh no, I still want to get the cis thing. I was going to talk about one other thing on this. I don't remember. Where was I going with that? I'm trying to think. I was talking about like using terms like cis. Talking about like the vast majority of women support trans people. And so with their gaslighting. Oh yeah. Well, no, we talked about the cast review already, right? I'll just say at the end of the day, they don't care about... Oh yeah, now I remember what I was going to say. So I'll just wrap this up with this, all right? It should be enough to simply be human to get basic human dignity and respect. I understand that some trans people might get irritated that I'm even having to make these arguments, or they feel like, oh, well, Zoe, if you're making these arguments, do you expect me to make these arguments? I don't expect you to talk to these people at all. You don't have to offer them an argument. You don't have to justify your existence. You shouldn't. It's not fair to you. And I understand that most of us are just going about their lives and they don't want to do the things that I do. They don't want to engage with these people. They don't want to say, well, come over here, gender critical, talk to me. Come over here, TERF. Let's have a conversation. Because at the end of the day, a lot of those people are so irrational, they're not going to change their mind. Their goal is to abuse you. That's it. So you're like, why would I voluntarily interact with people whose goal is to abuse me or hurt me? That is what they want to do. They want to psychologically hurt you. They want to take away medical care. They want to legislate where you are and are not allowed to go. They want to force you to stay in your house. They want to determine like how you dress, what pronouns you're allowed to use, what speech you're allowed to use, what sports you can play in. Okay. It's very obvious that these people are a very, very high control group, and they do not want you saying anything that disagrees with their little bubble of a worldview. And you're not allowed to exist in a way that they don't want you to exist. All right. I understand how painful it is to interact with these people. I just so happen to have a very, very, very high resilience to these types of people because I care a lot about justice, a lot. So when I see these people saying this stuff to me, because I know that these people, like I know where their arguments are coming from. I know there's no data supporting this. I know that all of their positions are not justified. They have no good arguments. They have no ground to stand on at all other than being unreasonable. Like, I'm not bothered by the things that they say about me. I'm bothered by legislators that listen to them. I'm bothered by places that will like ban trans women from like a gym or something because like, oh no, some TERF might get upset. All right. When's the last time that we ever banned anyone based on what some bigot thinks? Like, oh no, what if some bigot gets upset that I allow, you know, some, whatever their targeted demographic here is? What if there were Christian bigots that would get upset if I allowed a Muslim to come into like my cafe and eat in my cafe? All right. Should I ban Muslims? No. Right? The problem, the person that has the problem is the bigot. It's their responsibility to grapple with that. And if they want to exist in public society with the rest of us, then they will curtail their worst impulses. And they will still treat a Muslim with respect and not confront them in public or make an issue out of this. Instead, you have TERFs encouraging people that follow them to follow trans women in the bathroom and take photos of us in the bathroom. That's the level of harassment that these people are willing to go. They are unreasonable, and I understand if you don't want to interact with them. And I'm just going to say, whatever your identity is, you're valid in that identity. All right. You are an existent person. You don't have to give a justification for your existence. None of us do. Right? You exist. You're an actualized being. Propositions require justification. Existence doesn't require justification. Like when you're standing here with us. And I just want to say that, like, I don't think that you should have to go out and argue for this. I'm also not a trans medicalist. And I don't think that people have to medically transition to be valid as a trans person. None of that stuff. All right. I would be like a too cute is what they would call me. Right. I think, like, you know, your identity alone is valid enough in order to justify you being, you know, a woman, a man, non-binary, whatever. That's it. And I feel like you should be loved and supported. You know, you should also have access to entertainment that represents you. You should be able to watch movies that have characters that represent you, or play video games with characters that you can connect with. And I'm not saying, obviously, like every single movie, game, whatever has to have trans people in it. That's not the point that I'm making. I'm saying that, like, you deserve to take up space in the world. Like, you are a worthwhile person. And it frustrates me to no end that these people want to hurt us so much, especially, you know, like trans kids that are the most vulnerable of any of us. And they say, like, oh, well, the NHS takes away healthcare and you don't see, like, suicide spiking. And we know that, like, at least 50 kids have suicided since the NHS shut down services for them. But they don't want us to talk about that. They don't want to focus on that. And we know that the UK government has been engaged in a dedicated cover-up of these deaths. And I appreciate you as well, Kyle. Thanks for being here. I mean, genuinely, this stuff is, you know, some of it's very dark. And when you see, like, people like you that are just being endlessly targeted by these people, by these governments, you know, I saw an article today that I thought about covering because I thought maybe it would be something that we should talk about. And instead of reading the article or whatever, I can just tell you, the headline says enough, and you can read further into it if you want to. Just search this and you'll find the article. It's like 400,000 plus trans people have relocated from their home state since the last election. I'm one of the people that relocated. I'm in that 400,000 group. And I see, like, a lot of trans people within some of the communities I'm part of. A lot of them are like, wow, it's so weird to just see a stat that you're a part of. Like, it's a societal statistic and you're like, oh yeah, I'm in that group. Right? That happened to me already. I already had to move out of a state that I was in because of the restrictive laws that the state was trying to pass about driver's licenses. And then, like, I've got family in this state and I can't visit them down there. And they'll say things like, oh, we're going to do X, Y, and Z, you know, you're invited or you're welcome down here. And I have to remind them once again, if I go in that state, I can be arrested because the state is going to say that, you know, my driver's license is felony fraud. That's Florida. Can't go to that state. You know, I used to work and I would go through Texas all the time. I can't go to Texas now. I'm not going to risk being arrested for being trans. And at the end of the day, these people don't appreciate our lives at all. They devalue our lives. They talk about us like we're rodents. Not that There's anything wrong with like rats and rodents. I think that they're adorable, but I know what they mean, right? I know that when they're calling us rodents, or they mean vermin, as in, you know, what's the entailment there? All right, use some inference. If somebody's calling you rodents, they're calling you vermin. What do you do with vermin? You exterminate them. That's really what they're getting at. And a lot of these views, that's what they mean. That's ultimately where this stuff leads to. That's why the Holocaust Museum, issued warnings about, that they think that there's an ongoing transgenocide already in progress, already happening in this country. And when you look at like 50 kids killing themselves, and I've seen like plenty of people that are in some of the social circles I'm in, didn't make it. And they say, oh, well, why won't you, talk with us? And why won't you argue this? And it's like, well, maybe the abject suffering that you're causing those people, that's why they don't want to talk to you. Maybe the fact that you are, uprooting our lives and like, killing kids, maybe that's why they don't want to talk to you. And if you're, if you're on there, if you're online and you endlessly attack trans people, you'll just be signal boosted to no end by these TERFs. But if you speak on behalf of trans issues, then, you're largely ignored. You'll be treated like you are, they'll dismiss you as like a TRA or something. And it doesn't matter what the facts are. It doesn't matter what the studies are. I mean, it doesn't really. At the end of the day, they've already made up their own bigoted opinions, and that's what they're going to stick with. Because a lot of times I can ask them, like, what would change your mind on this subject? Like, legitimately, what would change your mind? And a lot of them say nothing. Nothing. That it's impossible that they're wrong about this. So that is the mindset that a lot of these people have when you're talking to them. And like, when you think about this, just know that a lot of us have family that have disowned us, or family that has said things to us, like they vote for politicians and support policies that would make our lives impossible. It's your own family. So this is not something that we do trivially. This is not something that we're doing flippant. This is who we are for real. And trans people have been killed for millennia for being who we are. There's a popular phrase among LGBT people, and they'll say things like, be gay, do crime. And people are like, oh my God. Of course, usually it's cishet people that are not in the know. They'll say, this person is advocating for crime. This person's advocating for violence. And it's like, what do you think they mean when they say, be gay, do crime? Why do you think be gay is part of that phrase? It's because in something like 70 countries around the world, it's illegal to be queer. Remember the sodomy laws that I was talking about? So every gay person before the year 2003 across the United States that was hooking up with other LGBT people, they were committing crimes. That's what they're talking about. That's what they're getting at. And when you say like, why do we need pride? Because the government is not making a dedicated effort to limit your rights, because politicians are not trying to take your kids from you, because politicians are not suggesting that you should be locked up in an institution. That's why. Because we're still killed around the world. And you might say, well, in Southern California, there's pride flags all over the place and everything seems fine. Yeah, because you're looking at it, you're being small-minded and cherry picking some specific location without realizing that there's other places in the country that literally try to ban holding hands together. It's like they have no appreciation for history. They forget about everything. They don't remember the Stonewall riots at all. All right, 69. They don't remember 03 for the sodomy laws. They don't remember gay marriage getting passed in 2015. So they have no memory of this at all. And in the UK, they had similar garbage laws on the books. And you see what like Florida is doing to trans people and Texas is doing. And you look around this country, more and more of these places are wasting legislation, spending money on banning trans children from sports, or better yet, passing bills to stop trans kids from being able to get access to surgeries when none of these kids are getting surgeries in the first place. But they don't ban circumcision. That's fine. And for intersex children, they will just do GRS on them as babies before they can ever consent or dream about how they would like their body to be. And they'll just do that. You say in Florida, if you exist as a trans person committing ID fraud or some shit, what they do to us in prison is apparently perfectly, 100%. And that's not even talking about like, you know, talking like women's prisons and that type of thing. And essentially in the United States, rape is part of a trans woman's prison sentence. Not V coding, for those of you that don't know. And if you don't know what V coding is, you should look it up. It's horrific. And I just get so frustrated that there's so many human abuses committed against trans people. And in the case of V coding, like literally abuse of human rights and atrocity there. But then we're expected to just, be compliant. Why don't we just be quiet and go away? Because y'all will not leave us alone. That's why. And I told you that this stream was going to be like a trans rights stream, that I had a lot I wanted to say on it. And maybe after this, I'm going to clip this into a video. And maybe after this, I might stop talking about specifically trans issues for a little while. And I'll talk about other things. I wanted to get to the State of the Union, but it's already gone on almost 2 hours right now. Doubt I'm going to get to it because I'm so frustrated with this. Like, I genuinely don't understand how people can attack and attack and attack our community and all the shit that I've laid out here, and then turn around and act surprised when it's like, yeah, most of us don't want to talk to you. Most of us don't want to have anything to do with you, but I will. I'll talk to you. Perfectly fine. Because I feel like there's so many people that are not aware of this information. They don't know it. People that are like in the more of the center position or the liberal, or you end up having people like Gavin Newsom that should know better, but he's being led around on a leash right now by right-wing talk shows. So he can endlessly peddle like seeding trans issues. How pathetic is that? That's supposed to be a person that I would be excited as a president going, fuck Gavin Newsom. Right? If you can't sort out which side of justice is on trans issues, then I don't trust your judgment to be a president on any other issue. Like, the data is overwhelming in support of trans people. We've had this research forever and a day, and you can go and talk to as many trans people as you'd want to, but he won't do it. And I'm supposed to trust that this man has a good sense, he has good moral conviction, he's going to make good decisions. Like, he's looking at, he has all the information available to him in the world, all the data, and he can't figure it out. No, I'm sorry, that does not bode well for a president for me, okay? If you tell me, do you want a president that can't understand studies, that refuses to talk to people of the demographic that is being targeted by these gender critical types? Like, he will not even talk with them. We see with West Streeting and shit like that in the UK of what's going on over there. And you wonder, like, how do they have so many bad policies that are being entertained in their government? It's because of people like Wes, people like Gavin. All right? If he can't sort out trans issues, then I do not trust him at all to be able to sort out anything on like Gaza and Israel, which like almost guaranteed he supports Israel. Almost guaranteed. And at the end of the day, this is why like I'm fine talking to these people. Like, we can come on and we can chat. Like, you can jump in my Discord. We can talk about it. But just know that I'm going to record it because I'm going to eventually have a little database of all these people that want to come and talk to me. And you can see exactly how these conversations go. Because at the end of the day, they have some specific goals in mind when they want to chat. They want to try to convince you that their gender critical positions are reasonable, that the conclusions that they're coming to are reasonable. They're not. And all of them end up with the same goal in mind. All of them end up with the reduction of trans people. And often, as Helen Joyce said, right, by any means necessary. I don't think I have to spell out for you what that means. What does any means necessary mean? What does it mean when they say there's no such thing as trans children, and as an adult, you are a liar if you say you are a trans child? That is an impossibility. All right? Are you following it yet? And they want to say, like, well, you convert into an ideology as an adult. Right? Conflating the existence of people with an ideology. Because keep in mind, like, ideologies are something that, like, come and go. That's their point. They want to conflate us to an ideology. That way they can strip our rights away. That's what the goal is. Because you justify taking away medical transition. You justify taking away social transition. You justify limiting access to spaces where we would be comfortable in, that we would obviously belong in. That's the justification for doing all of that stuff. Because you say, oh, it's an ideology. Oh, don't worry. We just need to put them in an insane asylum because, of some ideology. And people act confused. Like, they don't understand the difference between their bigotry and what they're doing and other bigots that are motivated by the same thing. Now, you can say, like, there's analogies, and people say, well, don't compare this group to that group. All right? We're not comparing those groups. We're comparing the bigotry that is weaponized against the groups. That's it.